So good afternoon or good evening, and welcome to the Ivar Paulson lectures in the study of religion. And these lectures are organized by the Estonian Society for the Study of Religions in collaboration with the Estonian Doctoral School for Humanities and Arts, and also the School of Theology and Religious Studies of the University of Tartu. And this year we are honored to welcome Professor Catharina Raudvere as our speaker. And Professor Raudvere is an internationally acclaimed scholar specializing in the Old Norse religion and mythology, as well as contemporary Islam, especially Muslim religious practices and Sufism. And Professor Raudvere is a professor of the history of religions in the University of Copenhagen. She is also the author of numerous influential works, including her recent book, co-edited with Petek, Onur, titled Neo-Ottoman Imaginaries in Contemporary Turkey, Modernity, Memory and Identity in Southeast Europe. And over the next few days, Professor Raudvere will deliver a series of 3 lectures on the overarching theme of performative and interpretive genres in contemporary piety communities. And today's lecture, titled Seeing and Being Seen, Community Life Beyond the Established Religious Institutions, marks the beginning of this series. So thank you, Professor Raudvere, for joining us today, and I'm pleased to give the floor to you. But before that, I would like to present you a book called A Reader, which is edited by Indrek Peedu, and it contains several works of Estonian researchers of religion.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this kind presentation and also for the invitation to come here. I'm happy and I'm honored. And I've already been received with such generosity as always here in Tartu. Thank you so much for the book, which I only have in sloppy PDF files. So it's a joy to have the real thing. Because my point of departure here for today and for the coming 2 days is that Estonia is a very special environment for the study of religion, because it has kept, much more than the other Nordic countries, the relation between the study of religion and folkloristics and other types of, let's say, cultural history. And I think this is a very fertile ground that has also been my point of departure in my research. I think it's also so fantastic that you honor one of the great Estonian scholars of religion and also folklore, Ivar Paulson, to give his name to a series of lectures. And I understand that this is also something that is especially directed to you PhD students, but also to the Association of the Study of Religion. And Ivar Paulson, like Oscar Loritz and Gustav Renck, as you know, they fled during the war. They lived in Sweden. So they are also part of my Swedish intellectual history. And they made great contributions, like so many academics in exile. And they also represent this bridge in between. And this is an impressive volume. And I think that these exiled academics, I think they're really worth having their intellectual history written. And I hope you continue to do this in English, because I think this is of interest to really a broad international crowd to read about. And especially how they contributed to their new academic environments. And because I think it's very important to emphasize that they also brought things with them for example, the three names that I mentioned, to Sweden, of an intellectual history, of an academic training that they had with them. And I think maybe there is something in this background that made me having this double focus that I've had in my life as a researcher, going from the study of Old Norse religion and folklore to study contemporary Islam, as Helen mentioned here. Because it's not so that they are completely different. I think I brought perspectives with me from the study of folklore and Old Norse religion. And I think that theme is practice, what people do, an interest in performances and rituals that I brought from the folklore history of religion studies to the study of contemporary Islam. And actually, thank you so much for the book, because this is something that I took from one of my PDFs in my computer. This is the beginning of a longer quote that I will give you on the second slide, which I found that really put me on the track of, it doesn't say that religion, it says that religiosity has been a popular research topic for academic scholars in Estonia for a long time. And yes, I think that my conclusion of this towards the end of today's lecture will also be, yes, it is because of this nearness between the study of religion and folklore studies. Because Indrek's quote continues, religiosity has been a popular research topic for academic scholars in Estonia for a long time. Even since the 19th century, numerous scholars from various academic backgrounds have found religion the most intriguing topic they would like to focus on, either from a thoroughly historical and textual point of view or by dealing with contemporary developments, relying on fieldwork-based research perspectives. And thank you, Indrek, for writing that. And I would like also the combination of these two. They are not each other's contrasts. They work very well together. So starting with giving you a short background to the empirical material that I will present to you during these 3 days. That is my ongoing research in Bosnia. Among what I call a piety community of women, hence the title of today. And this is a work that has been funded from 3 various Danish research funds. The Carlsberg Foundation that supported us for over 5 years with a project that we called The Many Roads in Modernity. And from that, we established a research center that we call The Many Roads in Modernity. That had a lot of focus on, let's say, modern history, the modern history of Southeast Europe, but also of the Ottoman heritage in this region. And not only among the Muslims of Southeastern Europe, but in general. And our perspective was long, and we were several people working on this project from 1870 up until today. This has continued with a research project more focused on religiosity, practices, performances, called Pious Practices Among Danish Muslims, Diversity, Devotion and Aesthetics, that is now supported by the Danish Research Council. So we are lucky to be able to continue this research center that we still call The Many Roads in Modernity, because it also, at, let's say, if we talk scale, at, let's say, a political level, at a grander scale, it is still about how religious communities, individuals, states for that matter also, relate to the relationship between religious communities and the space for religion in modern societies. This is shameless advertisement, because we also have a book series. This is just to show that we are dealing with very wide topics. We have a book series with Palgrave Macmillan called Modernity, Memory and Identity in Southeast Europe. The more recent books have dealt with Turkish Jewish history. It has dealt with nostalgia. It has dealt with ethnographic discourses on women. And also I brought on the book, A Cultural History of the Winter Olympics. I never thought I would read a book about Olympic Games at all, but this is a splendid study over how the planning for the Winter Olympics in Sarajevo in '84, in the old days, how that transformed the city from a cultural perspective. If you are looking for results from the Olympics, don't read this book, because it's about the cultural change of the city rather than the Olympic Games. A couple of days ago, I attended a similar event for PhD students in Islamology in Sweden. It was a Zoom seminar where we all brought up various empirical data, but where I try to seek out what can we share in our discussions. So this is sort of a small agenda about themes that we could bring up, irrespective of we do historical studies or contemporary studies, if we are dealing with Islam or other religious groups in contemporary times. But it also are 4 themes that run through the lectures this week, and I think for my work in general on this Bosnian piety community. Because there is, of course, a focus on practice, on rituals and other religious practices. Not only the formal rituals that are scheduled, that have a certain rhythm, but also other practices that mark religious identity, represent personal choices, etc. They cannot be distinguished from religion and politics. It also relates to religious communities and formal religious authorities. Where can we seek for fellowships and communities that are not necessarily connected to, let's say, the state organization of religion, but also to other modes of communicating, not necessarily being in opposition in any way. It's not like a contrast or dichotomy, but where do people come together for, let's say, rituals and practices that they find meaningful in their lives today, and how does that relate to, let's say, the established, often very formal religious authority? Is this competition, or is this regarded as, let's say, a positive development of contemporary religiosity? I have worked a lot with women in Islamic contexts, but we could say women, or rather new agents. And here's one of my major points in my ongoing research on Bosnia. New agents as active readers, interpreters, and text producers. Because I think there is a tendency in the study of, let's say, rituals and practices, that this is in one way or the other, either explicitly or implicitly, as of some kind of a subtext, put in contrast to religious texts. Because what I would like to emphasize in my research, that the women I have studied in Bosnia and before that in Turkey, they have a very strong relation to the sacred scriptures. They read, they interpret, and by interpreting, they also produce new texts, oral texts and written texts as well. So they are not in any competition with each other. So these are 4 broad themes that I hope that we can discuss over the coming days together. So I would like to take you to Bosnia, or rather Bosnia and Herzegovina, which is the full name of the country, which used to be a part of former Yugoslavia. And as you know from Southeastern Europe, now divided into different countries. It's a small country. It's a country with a varied population, with various ethnicities, religious belongings, people who don't so they officially recognize any religion, etc., but with a majority of Muslims in the country. And choosing the title for today, Seeing and Being Seen, is precisely an attempt to describe this piety community. It is by seeing, looking at society today in Bosnia, identifying problems, challenges of both, let's say, political kind, of religious kind, of identity matters, challenges are how to support oneself, being able to give children education, etc. That is reacting to contemporary problems, but also by doing so, forming some kind of community, being very much visible, being seen as an active agent that takes a stand on contemporary issues. So it is about community life beyond the established religious institutions. And here I want to focus on its agents. Who is active in such circles? How do they handle this visibility? It's not just having an opinion over a cup of tea. By joining some kind of, even though informal community, you're also becoming visible as someone who takes a stand on religious matters, on political matters, on everyday issues in your local community. It's about, to a very great extent, I would say, about performative and interpretive genres. That by coming together for prayers, for recitation, singing, there's a lot of singing in Bosnia also among the Muslims. There is, let's say, a repertoire of genres that those who take initiatives for prayer meetings of this kind can use. And the very choice of a genre sort of also marks a certain theological stand, a certain stand in relation to how you interpret tradition. Because that is also one of my points here, that it's not only about interpreting the Holy Scriptures, it's also about interpreting tradition. Who is the keeper of religious tradition? Who is a legitimate keeper of such a tradition, etc.? And all these things are, of course, also connected to issues about spaces and mobility. Where is there an open space for bringing in, let's say, new fellowships, new circles of praying people, and what is the readiness for mobility in this sense? And maybe you have already reacted to the words piety and pious, and they are complicated, I would say. Especially discussing the Islamic religion, it should not be confused with, in my case, with what is usually called the piety movements. For example, Islamistic circles in, thank you so much, in Egypt. So it's not, because piety movements in Egypt, for example, or Pakistan, are often associated with Islamic circles, with radical views of how to interpret religion and views of society. But piety and pious, in my case here, is more pointing to a certain kind of, let's say, religiously founded engagement in local devotional activities. That is either being an organizer of or a very active participant in such activities. That has also to do with contributing to civil society and to charity work. So it's not by necessity with any political dimensions, but more the engagement, the active choice of certain circles where you want to put your energy, your trust and your hopes for, let's say, a more developed spiritual life and for good deeds for society in general. And I think Pious and piety, and also devotion mentioned here, charity, for example, is a semantic field that used locally could have very mixed meanings. They could be both including and excluding. They could be including when they are used as praise for an individual or a group, but they could also be excluding when critics of these activities use them as some kind of definition. It's very seldom a self-definition. It's about deeming somebody else. It's about deeming a person or a group or a certain kind of activities. Those of you who study Islam also know that there is, since centuries, a discussion about what is bid'ah, what is forbidden, what is, let's say, additions to religion, and then pious could be turned 180 degrees. So this is more my way of trying to conceptualizing the group I'm working on as a piety community. In Bosnia-Herzegovina and its Ottoman background is sort of the important historical, theological, and intellectual background to a group like this. Because the Ottomans brought with them, when the Ottoman Empire was expanding, brought with them, let's say, a performative repertoires. That is, these genres that I was talking about, ways of praying outside the mandatory 5 prayers a day. Often these performative repertoires have their roots in the Sufi orders of, let's say, practices that are cultivated in Sufi circles. These could be the so-called Zikir prayer, repeating the names of God. That could be really long sessions where the repetition as such is regarded as a spiritual tool to focus, to sort of developing a nearness to God. It is very often in Bosnia connected to commemorative gatherings. That is remembering the dead. It could be in the family and in the immediate circle. It could also be of well-known Sufi sheikhs or from the Yugoslav period, teachers that were not formally Sufi sheikhs, but well-known in a city like Sarajevo for those who kept up the Sufi tradition. And more about that in the coming lectures. Because this commemoration is often linked to this zikr of repeating God's name, of singing these specific Bosnian hymns, reciting the Quran, etc. And they are embedded in both public and private rituals. They could be public in the sense that they are organized for the local mosque. They could be advertised on the billboard. They could also be meetings in a private home. They are more or less always collective, but the spaces chosen for them shifts. It could be the intention of the organizer. It could also, as in the Yugoslav era, for example, being what is the possible place to organize these things. Because there is a history in Bosnia that is more than the Ottoman background. Of course, I mean, religious language, religious practices, they do have their Ottoman roots, but there are also other processes in the 20th century that deeply affects how people understand tradition, belonging, and citizenship. We have the authoritarian regimes during the 20th century with a deep impact on ethno-religious rhetoric that was mobilizing towards the end of the Yugoslav period, of course, during the full-scale war in the 1990s, and also connected to obvious conservative influences. And I hesitated to write from abroad. Of course, many of these conservative trends have, let's say, they have a background outside Bosnia, but one should also remember that they are brought back by Bosnians who, for example, go for education abroad and did so already in the Yugoslav era. It also influences to a great extent the references to cultural heritage, the narratives about history, the narratives of family history, the narratives of persons regarded to be spiritual leaders from the past, etc. So the references to cultural heritage could be both used for rejection and concord. It could be to putting up firm borders to who we are and who we are not, but also to build up concord, fellowship, Gemeinschaft, if we want to use that term. So we have a Sufi heritage since the 15th century. Actually, the Sufi groups came to the Balkans before the Ottomans did, because the Sufis came with the tradespeople. And the tradespeople coming from the Ottoman lands sought out fellow Sufis when they traveled for trade. And affected, as I said, ritual life, modes of prayers, and also offered for a group like the one I have been studying, also a very rich corpus of literature, of music, art, architecture, cultural sources in general. Which is rich, it's hailed, it's by most Bosnian Muslims regarded as an important part of cultural heritage, but not necessarily used by everyone. So this is also one of the hallmarks of this piety community, that they are known for making use of these resources, making use of this corpus. And it's also one of the ways that they are gaining legitimacy for their activities, because they are so closely connected with this resource of literature and art. It also opens up for something that is not something new. I often get the question, but this must be very new that women are so active in organizing meetings like this. And I would say, no. This we can see in history too. I don't say that the historical records are numerous or that they constitute any core of the historical records, but women have been organizing prayer meetings, recitations of this kind for a long time. In short, women have been preaching and teaching for a long time. And for the women active today, these are very important historical references to make. Because as I said before, this is not about being oppositional or being contradictory to any formal theological authorities. This is more being, let's say, conventional, taking up traditions that suits in how they combine these resources, that suits prayer meetings for today. But it's very important for these women also to be able to point to the historical background, to see that we are just continuing. They don't define these activities themselves as being different or newly created, but seeing themselves as part of a long, long chain. So this women's pious community in Sarajevo that I've been studying is more of a prayer circle than an organized group. The small-scale fellowship is sort of one of the attractions of the group, that it's not big scale, it's not formal. It's about participant making an active choice to attend, to take part, but not necessarily signing up for any long-term commitment, signing up for any theological stand for that matter. But it is small scale, and I think there is one important word to mention here, and that is trust. This is a group that you attend because you trust the way this cultural heritage is being performed. I don't really like the dichotomy between the private and the public, and I don't think so many people do today. I think the spaces in between are much more of interest. The spaces between what is sort of definitely a private zone and a public, what I've called the semi-public gatherings, that they are not just open to everyone and advertised, etc., but they are known of. That's also a part of the attraction of prayer circles like this, that they are known of in the vicinity. You know of them, that a certain very pious person, sort of regarded as pious, is organizing prayers of this kind. And therefore, it has a character of an openness, but still you must make this private choice, and you must also trust the organizer to go there and to trust that this is an honorable and proper way of doing the prayers. So there is a Bosnian term called Bula. And Bula is a female teacher. It's an old word. It's an honorary title. It has no official connotations. It has a special history from the war in the 90s, when the Serbs used the term Bula as a very bad word to characterize Bosnian Muslim women, especially those who wore the headscarf. So they were trying to appropriate this word, to turn it from a very positive word into something very negative. So I think part of activities of this kind is also a way of reestablishing it as a positive way of honoring a woman, young or old, that you think have these qualifications to lead prayers, take responsibilities for recitations, etc. So since these are meetings in this interesting semi-public zone, so to speak, I think the meetings are also more defined by the organizers than necessarily by these women teachers that are invited to this meeting. Someone is organizing a prayer in her home, for example, and by picking certain of these bulas, famous Quran reciters, women with good voices for the singing, women with knowledge of the legends and the narratives, the organizer of this, that is not something regularly every Thursday or whatever, but it's for a special occasion. And here the commemoration comes in. Maybe it's for honoring those in the family who died during the war, or a locally well-known Sufi teacher. And these choices define this particular prayer session. So we have the hafizas, that is a female. A hafiz is a Quran reciter, a male one, and a hafiza is a female one. And this is kind of an honorary title, but it's more official than Bula, because you get a diploma if you have gone to Quran school and learned the proper way of reciting, knowing most parts of the Quran by heart, you get this diploma. And of course, honorable women to have at the prayer meeting that you're organizing. It could also be lead singers of these special, I don't like the English term hymn, because it's so Christian, but it's very difficult to find another good word for these often, but not always, narrative songs that tell something of religious significance, which we find in many religious traditions. And they have special choruses in between the stanzas. So the full audience can join in, and all of the sudden, it starts to remind the participants of a zikr where you repeat the names of God. Because the chorus could be like Allah, Allah. So I would say the border zones, not only between the private and the public, but also the border zones in between the genres, both of ritual kind, of textual kind, they often come very close to each other. And a skillful woman who can lead a prayer session of this kind also know how to navigate in between these genres to get what is very much praised among the participants, that this has atmosphere. Atmosphere is used in this very positive way that, oh, that prayer meeting with lady this and that, it really had the right atmosphere. It was proper. It was not only proper in terms of regulation and that people behaved in a good way, it was also interesting because let's say the freely formulated prayers, the lecture or even a sermon to the women was also interesting. And all this in combination created that kind of an atmosphere. So genres and expressive forms are at the center of how the women defined what kind of rituals they are organizing and attending, and what characterizes their fellowship. And this goes back to these resources of being well-trained, of having the capacity, of having, let's say, the traditional knowledge of how to execute these things. So I would say that this has to do with vernacular language. And language is a big issue when we are talking about this kind of prayer meetings, because this Bosnian Muslim environment is an example for how many languages can mix and merge during the same prayer meeting. And not in the sense that, oh, I understand two of these languages, but not the third and the fourth one. It's more that they together, they are part of creating this atmosphere. They are also supporting this thought about this is a lineage. This is keeping tradition by using all these languages. Because what languages do we have at hand here? Of course, Bosnian. Which is the language of communication in prayers, in the singing, in the sermons, etc. Mm-hmm. Of course, Arabic, recitations from the Quran, but also Ottoman Turkish. Many of the songs, they could either be translated into Bosnian or sung in Ottoman Turkish, or that the stanza is in Bosnian and the chorus that all people join in is in Ottoman Turkish. So what's then the fourth language? Well, that surprised me when I started to work in Bosnia, and that is Persian. Persian as a very important language in Sufi circles, reading Rumi's work, for example. And of course, very few people in Bosnia know Persian to that extent that they read Rumi. But listening into a recitation of Rumi or having just a small part read of Rumi sort of also adds to this atmosphere that this is done in the correct and traditional way. So vernacular language is, on the one hand, of course, the daily language Bosnian, of course, which you use to express your religious experiences, your opinions, you formulate problems and issues in contemporary times. This is the language used to explicate and interpret the Quran and the stories. I would say that there is also a kind of vernacular rituals. Because before going to Bosnia in the early 2000s, I did some work among Bosnian Muslims in Malmö and in Copenhagen. And I had no intention whatsoever to go to Bosnia and do research. As with fieldwork, it just happened. But One significant thing among Bosnian Muslims in Scandinavia is that other Muslims, let's say from Pakistan or Somalia or North Africa and whatnot, they regarded some of the Bosnian Muslim traditions as very strange. They had not seen the like. They had not seen so much singing in prayer meetings, for example, even the fact that men and women could sing religious songs together. So I think there is a vernacular aspect to the rituals as well. It's not only that they form, let's say, these identity markers, that we are Bosnian Muslims and therefore we organize prayer meetings in this way. It's also, let's say, a historical fact. It comes from this rich Ottoman background. It comes with the experiences of authoritarian rule and violence during the war. That affects, let's say, the content of newly written songs. So these are also experience in the history of the Bosnian Muslims. I did not, write vernacular knowledge here. And I really want to discuss this with you after this. We can take it in the discussions, because my hesitation is not against the way you use it in your book, not at all, but using it as a concept, because I'm just writing up a book about this piety community, is that will that be understood as I am claiming that this is a special kind of knowledge that is more Bosnian than Islamic. I didn't want to be misread at this point. But of course, there is something that goes with a vernacular knowledge about shared memories, collective memories, shared experience, etc. That is also comes so close to something I also could call vernacular knowledge. So these gatherings, they also have a strong element of what we could call aesthetic appreciation. What you find beautiful, what you find proper, what you find sort of the peak of Ottoman Bosnian culture. You attend the meetings because you find them beautiful. So I don't think that we have a lakmus paper that could say, oh, is this religious or is this cultural? It comes together. It's very much entangled with each other. It's also a conscious choice of genres because of their beauty, because of their history, because of the way the metaphors are constructed and the rhythm of the choruses and the songs, etc. But it's also something that they connote something in the wider community, that these genres are chosen. Hence is this a group of this type. Yeah. And I would still say, and we will talk about this much more tomorrow, that the management of local mosques or Islamic authorities still shape the framework of the group's activities. We cannot exclude that there are religious authorities that, like Diyanet in Turkey, run the mosques of Bosnia. So there is still some kind of formal authority that does not necessarily intervene with the activities, but still have an influence. Which also means that I would say that this group is hardly controversial. No controversial opinions are stated here, or the practices are not controversial, but still it could be a matter of dispute outside the group. So that aspect is there, that possibility is there. So it's always important, how do you argue for certain choices in this repertoire of genres. Something that is specific for this prayer group is also that they share ritual responsibilities. Because when I started doing this fieldwork, there were several conferences and books published afterwards, and I was part of that myself, that really focused on Muslim female leadership. And leadership and authority were the key words. And of course, there are women who take leading roles. I don't dispute that. And they have authority as well. But I would rather emphasize also that this is something shared. This is a shared responsibility. Or we could put it like it's an acceptance of ritual tasks passed on from more experienced women that could ask a younger woman to be the reciter of a certain part of a surah of the Quran. So the lineage metaphor is often there as well. And this sharing is significant for this group. That let's say a prayer event, let's say that it takes 2 hours. It's not dominated only by 1 or 2 women, but also by the fact that responsibilities are shared and appreciated. Oops. So why do people attend these activities? Well, for several reasons, I would say. Of course, they attend a group like this, and parallel groups, of course, to share moments of prayer. That this is something organized for women in a place and a space that is considered to be proper, to be a good deed to do. It's a way of knowing that you can fulfill your prayer obligations, for example. It's also, these meetings are also intended to enjoy beauty and shared aesthetic values, because you appreciate the way the Quran is recited, you appreciate the singing, the songs, etc. It's appreciated to have an instant of reflection on spiritual or existential matters, that this is a way of coming together where you will know that you will get some kind of teaching, guidance, be reminded of existential issues, not necessarily given the answers, but you are encouraged to think about these things, to make up your mind on these matters. It could be also an opportunity to receive support and guidance, as well as being one who backs other women. So you can go there with your problems and issues, but you can also be somebody who takes part in supporting somebody else. It's a way of cultivating this sense of being part of a heritage. And I think this has been very much emphasized also after the war in the 90s. And this heritage, as I said, is of both religious and cultural character. It is something that we could call, it's an entanglement of the past, the present, and the future. Because many of the issues brought up in the teaching, for example, of course, they point forwards. We are confronted by this problem in society today. It could be even sort of hot topics like corruption, or it could be the materialism of the present times. But looking into the future, how can we solve it? Is it so that our small group can contribute to a better society? So we have these temporalities between the past, legendary history, present problems, and looking into the future. So I would say that attendance and participating is like a blurred zone. You are both someone who attends, but you're also participating. There's one organizer, but the roles can shift. You can also be appointed or asked by an elderly woman to make sure that she feels all right after this session, etc. So like public and private, I think the interesting things happens in between. So if I would put some keywords to the activities here, I would say that there are certain obligations, that as a good Muslim, you should say your prayers, you should act in a certain way. You're also obliged to, if you have the means, could be economic means or the cultural means, to provide possibilities for, in this case, other women. It's also a question of autonomy, that this is a space where there is a freedom, a certain possibility to take up these responsibilities, to draw from these cultural resources, that also point to a certain kind of flexibility. That you go to such a prayer meetings knowing the framework, but not exactly what will happen during this prayer meeting. Who has organized it? Who is the lead reciter, etc.? Who will take up the prayers, etc.? So within the repertoire, there are obligations, but also flexibility. And this points to something that I discuss as limits and limitations. And that points to the things that we are going to talk about tomorrow. What is the relation between such an autonomous group to the Muslim authorities, for example? Is it a competition? Are there conflicts? Is there agreement? Is this sort of solved? Oh, this is women's activities, so it doesn't sort of falls there into the background. So I would say that it's difficult to define the activities on any private-public scale. Rather, it's a matter of visibility and readiness to move. And I would really emphasize the readiness to move as much as the visibility. Because with a small group like this, with women that they have accumulated a lot of knowledge, they also have the readiness to move on, to reorganize. There is a mobility in this way of organizing. They have also identified what I call interpretive domains. What are the spaces where interpretations of convention or history and scriptures and tradition can take place? It's rather conventionalism than conservatism. I often get the question: Are these women, are they conservatives, or sort of, or what scale would you like to put them? And then I would say, well, they could be very radical when it comes to social, let's say, social justice, for example, or how to handle poverty, etc. But I would say that they are conventional rather than conservative. It's about sharing. It's about configuring local history, and this self-image of being a keeper of tradition. So it's an entanglement of religion and cultural memory. It's about religion and identity politics in a multi-religious society. And you can imagine, after the war in the 90s, these are still very sensitive topics. How you live your life as a practicing Muslim in relation to people with other faiths. Are there any possibilities of reconciliation, of interreligious dialogue, etc.? It's about these spaces for verbalizing interpretations of scriptures and tradition. It's the role of gender and generation when new groups are formed. I'm talking about women here, and a women's group that have both younger and elderly women engaged. But I would say this is something that we can find in all religious traditions in the world today, that we have these new readers, these new interpreters that come with other experiences, that come with other forms of education, and also would like to have a say about how to interpret tradition. What is the core issues in the Holy Scripture, for example? And of course, I was really emphasized local regional tradition. And of course, they are important. I do not deny that at all. But we shouldn't overemphasize the regional history. It should be there as a base, as the resources. But we shouldn't do that at the cost of these obvious transnational and global influences and the role of diaspora communities. Because as you know, during the war in the 90s, more than half of the population in Bosnia-Herzegovina was either internal refugees or external refugees. So there are large diaspora communities all over Europe and in North America as well. And this influence is reciprocal. It's not only that, you know, the influences go in one direction, they influence each other mutually. So this boils down to what I called seeing and being seen. This is about women who organize these prayer meetings because they see things in their immediate community. They see issues that they have to be handled. They see tradition. They see resources they want to share, that they want to transmit to others. And by doing so, they are being seen. They are being seen. Either they are praised or they are criticized. Not that they, as I said, they are controversial, but by organizing meetings like this, of course, you take a step outside the sort of the definitely private sphere, because you stand out as an organizer or a well-known reciter. And I would like to end with another quote, going in the same direction as Indrex, and this is from Ulo, when he talks about folkloristics, because I want to return to where I started. And this is this Estonian particularity of having religious studies and the study of religion so very much in parallel with folklore studies. Because Ulo writes here, folkloristics, as a socially oriented discipline, with its focus on vernacular practices and verbal expression, is well placed to analyze and interpret this contemporary changing religious landscape with its renewing conceptual tools. So thank you, Indrek and Ulo, for writing these things and emphasizing that there is a very specific and particular relationship between the folklore studies, the studies of folk religions, and the study of religion in general. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we have some time for the discussion and questions. So feel free, use your loud voice and use also the microphone.
Thank you so much, Catharina, for this amazing lecture and the amazing scholarship that is behind this. There are several lines of thought in my head. I was thinking about the gender perspective and the gender division, and perhaps I come in with my stereotypes about Islam. And you mentioned also the concept of formal religion or official religion. And I'm thinking now, could you say that the formal religion is more or only the business of men? And this kind of performative vernacular events, it's the women's domain. But do men also have their performative events? And the question also about this women teachers, that whom do they teach? That could also men be among their disciples or listeners? Or is it only a kind of hidden tradition among the women? And just trying to imagine these events, that you as a scholar is doing this very creative, interesting research. Could it be that you know more about these women, the rituals, than their husbands do? how much the husbands, the men, know about this, and what do they say? Do they say that, well, these are just some kind of women's things, that they're doing this and that's okay? Or you mentioned also critical views. Are the critical views mainly this coming from the formal, official religious side, from the men who are holding the power? So a lot of questions. Yeah, but yeah, this was an amazing talk.
And good questions. Thank you so much, Ulo, for this. And sitting there writing up the book, I'm really struggling with formal, informal. And like public and private, I really don't like this when it becomes a dichotomy. I try to use formal when I'm talking about, let's say, the established religious authority with a place in the state hierarchy. That is, as is the case with Turkey and Diyanet, there are differences too, but that there is a state authority that is formally in charge of all the mosques as premises for prayers and also as the employer of the imams. So in that sense, I use the formal, not to make it as a dichotomy to what is informal, less formally organized, I would say. The gender question is important because, of course, it has to do with the obligations that I mentioned, that men and women don't pray together. I also said that men and women sing together. So, I mean, there is since there's this broad landscape of different kinds of prayers, meetings, comings together, there is also in the Bosnian Muslim tradition examples of events where men and women can sing together. Maybe they are placed on either sides of the room, but it's still the same room. And of course, that could be shocking news to other Muslims, of course. I would say that these kinds of meetings, because there are various kinds that the women can organize, they are well known. They are well known, and that's why I also said we shouldn't think of them as new, as sort of something invented today. They go way back in history. And of course, that is connected to the fact that men in most Muslim societies have the privilege of using the mosque for the 5 daily prayers. Hence, they also have access to other forms of prayers in connection with that. They more often than women go to Sufi orders, for example, where this kind of, let's say, more emotional, more intense prayer forms are available if you would like to go there. So I would say I think that their husbands are very well aware of this kind of prayer meetings. They know the genres. They are a shared Bosnian Muslim heritage. Still, I think that they are looked upon as something that women do, something that elderly women are sort of the keepers of and the transmitters of. That's why also they are not regarded as controversial. But of course, there is a risk, as I said, stepping out, being visible in that sense. If there are sensitive topics that you want to talk about with your fellow women, for example, of course, there is always a risk among, let's say, a tight group or practitioners in a part of the city, sort of the immediate neighborhood. Of course, there is this this fact that you take upon yourself being an organizer of this kind of events that nobody should be able to criticize them. That's why it's important to create this safe and proper space for the activities. So known of, but not in detail, still in a, let's say, tense situation in society with immediate problems to be solved that are not of a religious kind, but sort of more how should we develop our future society, which is a grand problem, I would say, in Bosnia today. It could also be issues that some would think is sort of taken too far in a prayer meeting.
thank you very much for the talk. This will be a question by an outsider, in the sense that my background is in philosophy, not in folkloristics or religious studies. So I noticed that the phenomena you describe in these groups and their rituals and prayers and everything, these are all things that are publicly observable, including the utterances.
Yeah.
And I'm specifically interested in what's going on in their heads or minds in terms of believing. Is there any research on what these people actually believe religiously?
Yeah.
Or could this possibly be relevant for your research?
Oh, that's a good question and a difficult one. I'm not doing cognitive studies at all. I also think, as a historian of religion, that what we have in human cultures, be it in ancient history or today or in cyberspace, it's the way that they are expressing, communicating experiences of different kinds. And I think the combination of how people use verbal expressions, be it traditional things or, I wouldn't say improvise, but the words used at this very moment because it catches something that we feel is the atmosfera, as these women refer to. You combine it with ritual and other practices. It's the whole world of the visual things that surround a ritual, always the material things. I think that is as far as we get. Maybe this is a very pessimistic view, and I think your line is more optimistic. But I think this is really basically the human condition, be it religious or more generally existential, how we communicate. That is why, I think that's why humans produce art and literature. I mean, these resources that I talked about they are resources of artistic expression, of verbal expression, of aesthetic enjoyment. Of course, there are social rules, what is beautiful and not. But I think that's where we are. We have language. We have visual expressions. We have the bodily movements. But beyond that, I'm not really sure. But this is more about me than the women in Bosnia. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's fine, because there are also philosophers who claim that mental states are not real at all. So
Yeah.
beliefs don't matter because they don't exist. There is a view like that.
Thank you so much. I think it was beautiful. I was kind of envisioning how these prayer meetings go, and I think it was aesthetically also beautiful to imagine it. So thank you very much for your presentation. You said you conducted your study in 2000s, right? In the beginning of 2000s.
I began, yeah.
Yeah. So it's quite after the end of the war. So I can just imagine how these people still had the pain and suffering and all the memories of war. And I've noticed something in Ukrainian Christians and in their prayer life, how the war is somehow so much in their faith life, or how they pray, how they talk about God and war and suffering and what's going on there. So have you seen anything like this? How war has influenced their practices or their way of prayer or their picture of God in general?
I would say very much so. As I said, around 2006, I started in Scandinavia with Bosnian Muslims there. So I didn't start to collect this material until 2013. But nevertheless, of course, the war is still today in 2024, still very much present. And not only among Bosnian Muslims, of course, but the Catholics and the Orthodox, as well as, of course, among people who don't claim any specific religion. I would say where I encounter them is maybe not in how they conceptualize God or that their ritual practices are different, but I would say from a verbal point of view that the way that they talk about cultural memory, that they talk about the nation, these ilahi, these songs that I mentioned, they sometimes also have a sort of, they talk about the nation, about Bosnia, about the nation. They talk about sacrifices, they talk about the martyrs. So, I mean, the martyrs have even a special day for commemoration in the religious calendar, outside the conventional Muslim holidays, so to speak. So, of course, the war is present. The war is present in Bosnian cities, in the countryside. I mean, you can see it as soon as you land at the airport, you can see that the houses are not all of them fixed up. So the scars are there, very visible in the cityscape, very visible in how people talk about family and relatives. And I would say it has affected, let's say, narratives, songwriting, so that they give the memories of war, let's say, an image in the imaginaries that constitute the narratives and the singing. The war is definitely there. And of course, this is the concepts of shaheed, being a martyr, which is not an easy topic, because it was also that during the war, it was also officially proclaimed that everyone with a Muslim family background who died because of the war was a shaheed, which some families took as a way of honoring that they died because of the shelling of Sarajevo, for example, while other families with this Muslim background were not happy at all that their loved ones who had sort of died in the war were sort of included in this religious political rhetoric and mobilization in the name of religion. So these things are never the story of everyone. There are also family stories where they do not appreciate that it says shaheed on the gravestones, for example. And they are not less Muslim.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm just a bit curious, if you know, curious about possible impact or influence of the Soviet period to these female circles. And my own background is in Orthodox popular Christianity in Russia, northern Russia, and their Soviet power was very effective to destroy this official side of religiosity, but not so much this grassroots level, whatever religious life, including all those female rituals. And paradoxically, it made those, talking about Russia, these female whatever circles or their own activities somehow more prominent and stronger. So I'm just curious, could something similar happened in former Yugoslavia in 20th century, and does it have kind of positive impact to this non-official female circus today?
That's a really, really important question, because I was very interested in the Yugoslav era when I came the first time to Bosnia for research in, I think it was 2011, long before I started to collect actively for this project, because I could see in Scandinavia where we had I mean, most work migrants from Yugoslavia, they were either Serbs or Croats, but there were some Muslims, and they kept together, and they kept together with the Turks. And they, of course, then we had this, you know, the refugees coming because of the war, with religious issues, identity issues, belonging, stories, etc., sort of forming communities together, for example, in Malmö. So I was very interested in this. And in the beginning of my proper fieldwork, when I asked about the Yugoslav period, firstly, I got the answer, nothing. It was nothing happened. It was nothing. Slowly, and I realized this is not a question that you can pose that directly, because I was so eager to hear stories from the Yugoslav period. So I think it is. And I would say I took this very briefly. I just said authoritarian regimes, or how I put it on the slide. This, if you want to write the cultural history or the intellectual history of Bosnia and Herzegovina in the, let's say, the 20th century, this is so important because it really also framed religious life, and things were happening. I mean, Yugoslavia was not really the Soviet Union. It was definitely not Albania. But still, you know, the repressions against religion, and all religions, went up and down. There were worse periods and there were easier periods. Especially for men, if you went regularly to mosque, you wouldn't really make a career. Women, as I said, used to this kinds of meetings, could organize things in private, could organize name-giving gatherings, the circumcision of boys, etc. So they could make use of this flexibility between public and private space. And many of these rituals that I mentioned here were performed also throughout the Yugoslav period. Coming to today, I would say that there is a certain, let me put it like this, a combination of almost, no, how should I put it? Many, let's say, imams with a high position can say, oh, women kept Islam for the people during the Yugoslav period. But also sometimes with a sort of a patronizing touch, I would say, because then sort of life in mosque, etc., came back. But coming back to your question, that is so important. Of course, the experiences from life in Yugoslavia has had an impact on let's say, the cultural memory and how you understand these rituals, and especially emphasizing this continuity that no matter, I mean, it was World War II, it was the Yugoslav period, it was a war in the 90s, but we have kept up this. And of course, in practice, a lot of women were engaged in this. It's difficult to phrase this as that this is the official history, so to speak.
Thank you for the questions, discussion. We still have about 10 minutes. So if you have any comments, questions, please.
Well, hi, thank you so much for the beautiful presentation. It actually brought up some childhood memories for me as I was like growing up also in like a Muslim society. The question here is that like I remember as a kid we used to go like to a mosque to learn Quran, since we still didn't know the alphabet, but just to learn it from other like older generations. But then what happened afterward was that like we went to school, we learned Quran at the school, we learned Arabic at the school. So we were reading Quran. So at some point we kind of like gained some power to be like, you know, we know more than the person who was teaching us at the mosque. But what happened later was that like it actually brought up some sort of a, maybe a little bit like a negative thing, as like those generation that perhaps were with me in the mosque later they were just thinking like, you know, what is Islam and what we are following. So I don't know if in your case, the younger generation that they are in these gatherings later, what is their like, how do you call it, like a perspective afterward from Islam. The other thing is that like I remember, speaking of interpretation, I remember when there was like when I was a kid, I used to like go to some of this gathering, and we were again like reciting Quran or any other prayer book, but then which was only with women, obviously very separate from the men. But then what happened was that like it brought up some sort of another interpretation of experience, as if like I remember for a funeral, we were gathered and some woman said something, and the man was like, you just brought up some made up stories from your woman gathering, you know, like I was wondering if in the case of in this case that you were talking, is again women have this thing within the society that's saying that like that's your interpretation, that's just the made up thing that you gather from your gatherings, or something like that. I was trying to put it in a question, but I hope I just like was able to do so. But thank you.
Actually, two really interesting questions. And starting backwards, I would say that that's what I meant with. I almost regret using the word patronizing, but it's, you know, there are, you know, situations when praise has a twist that is not only praise, it's a way of marginalizing also. And I would say that in general, if you spoke to let's say imams in high positions, for example, maybe they wouldn't see these women's activities as interpretive. They would hail them for being the keepers of the song traditions, of bringing women together to pray, to reflect over the ethics in their lives, etc. But interpreters, no, maybe teachers of sort of basic Muslim conduct, maybe reciting in a proper way, but sort of being interpreters, bringing in new experiences. I don't think that they always regard this. I wouldn't say that they are the target of any harsh criticism, because rather this is something that happens in the margins. This is very much connected to either your personal network through your family and friends, or the local neighborhood, that if you don't want to see it, you don't have to see it. It's still public, as you said, because if you want to see it, it's also there. But I don't think it's recognized among, let's say, the spaces where theology is produced. I had a conflict once with an editor of a journal where I really wanted to emphasize these can also be places where contemporary theology is produced, because they bring up new issues, new problems that can be solved through religious reflection. So I think more that these activities, they are there at the margins, and if talked to in public by the authorities, for example, it is praising that they have kept up the traditions from the Yugoslav era. The first question was about the new generation. Yeah. I think the situation is a little bit particular in Bosnia, because towards the end of the Yugoslav period, religious schools that had been closed by Tito very early after World War II were reopened. Meanwhile, some young men had gone abroad to have Islamic theological education, to Al-Azhar in Cairo, but also to Malaysia, and bringing back ideas of sort of revivalism. Let's say that they went in the 70s and in the 80s, rather conservative views of Islam, not so much praising, let's say, the Ottoman heritage of Bosnian practices. So the number of Islamic schools, as well as Catholic and Orthodox schools, increased. So one could say that since 2000 and onwards, there are more women with a diploma from religious education at various levels than ever. But also many of them having, let's say, a more conservative view in the sense that it's part of this revivalism. It's a lot of focus on Arabic, for example, instead of the vernacular. So I think those who identify themselves as keepers, they also want to promote what is specific for the Bosnian traditions, while others consciously use Arabic terms instead of the Bosnian variants, which are often very similar, but that's part of the language ideology, I would say. Either you use them in Bosnian and with a specific Bosnian pronunciation, or you use the Arabic version of the term with a strong Arabic pronunciation. So I think getting a religious education, let's say, for the past decades, is not necessarily diving deep into these traditions. It could also be more of a standardized, contemporary, somewhat conservative Islam.
Yeah, we still have time for one question.
I don't know even how to put it in the question form. I just recognized, I wanted to ask if it's even relevant to your study that some of those dynamics that you described are very much kind of recognizable also in any kind of also Christian today's prayer groups, informal groups who gather exactly the same way outside of formal or mainstream practices. And I also just started to think I'm myself researching at the moment the Herrnhuter Brüdergemeinde, and in this connection they had those very informal gatherings that were also became a lot of conflict with the formal religious authorities in the 18th century Estonia, so and 19th century. So kind of just a remark. I don't know if there was any question.
Yeah, I think there was. I think there was, and a very important one, because there is a Finnish-German scholar called Spahić-Šiljak who has said that there is too much Islam in the study of Islam, that you explain everything with religion, especially the of course the Muslim faith. What's happening here? This more recent project, which is focused on Denmark and the pious practices among Danish Muslims, one thing that we have decided on, even before we got the money for the research, saying that if we get the money, we will end with a conference. And the point with that conference is that it will not be exclusively about Muslims and Islam. It will be about contemporary piety practices in all religions, because I think it's so important. And it's about these new readers, as I said, the new active readers. And we find them in all religious settings. I mean, you can find them among Hindus and Christians and Jews, etc. And I try to characterize them as the active readers, because they come with new experiences, often with new kinds of education. They speak with an authority coming from these experiences and educations that sometimes goes in contrast with, let's say, the traditional authorities. So I think you are absolutely right that this is a general trend in all world religions today.
I think we will conclude here today. Thank you once more, Professor Raudvere, for the today's lecture. And thank you for the participants as well. We will be here tomorrow at the same time, at the same place, to continue what we have started today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.